One of the many thousands to have fled to this beach in fear of an Israeli onslaught are Zainab al-Khalut and her children. After living in this tent for 4 months in Rafah, it's well worn and needs stitching back together. This, the most precious of the few possessions they were able to carry with them.
My children and I ran under fire and people died in front of us. The shrapnel hit our faces. The houses were hit by strikes while we were running. I found a shoe on the road. I wore it to be able to run better.
Airstrikes killed several people close by last night. In 7 months of war, Gaza's health ministry says the death toll has now surpassed 35,000, while tanks are rolling back into areas once claimed cleared of Hamas militants, like Jabalia in Gaza's north. But it's the IDF's plans to invade Rafah that have led President Biden to pause the US's sale of £2,000 bombs and other munitions to Israel.
Because there's 1 million people there in very close quarters who've been pushed there because of the military operations in other parts of Gaza, you would have really significant civilian casualties. And while Israel would also be able to kill some Hamas folks, many Hamas folks would melt away because they're terrorists. They're not really organized fighters in the way that we think about a typical military. In that context, he doesn't want to see American weapons used in that kind of operation.
Today, the British Foreign Secretary was asked if he'd ban weapons sales to Israel. He repeated he would not.
Well, we're in a completely different situation to the United States. They are a massive bulk state supplier of weapons to Israel. Overall, we're responsible for about less than 1% of their imports. We have a very rigorous legal process we go through, and that is on an ongoing basis.
The IDF says it's launched only precise operations inside Rafah, but the UN fears its call for civilians to evacuate is a precursor to a full-scale invasion, with catastrophic impact and the possibility, it's said, of further atrocities.
I can see no way that the latest evacuation orders, much less a full assault in an area with an extremely dense presence of civilians, can be reconciled with the binding requirements of international humanitarian law.
Today, in a diplomatic blow, Egypt, which is mediating a ceasefire deal, has announced its support for South Africa's case of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier vowed to keep going until victory. What victory looks like, unknown even to Israel's closest ally.
We also haven't seen a plan for what happens the day after this war in Gaza ends. The trajectory right now is that going into to Rafah, even to deal with these remaining battalions, especially in the absence of a plan for civilians, risks doing terrible harm to civilians and not solving the problem.
The US has warned tonight that without a post-war governance plan, anarchy and chaos would fill the vacuum here, where for so many it already reigns.